My name is Rachel Wilson, and at 52 years old, I never expected to be sobbing alone on a park bench in Rome. My son Brian, my only child who I'd raised single-handedly since birth, had abandoned me in a foreign country with barely enough euros for a meal. As I wiped away tears, a small voice with an American accent broke through my despair. "Are you okay, lady? Are you lost too?" I looked up to see a girl, around 9 years old, with intelligent eyes and expensive clothing. She was clearly scared, but trying to be brave. Despite my own desperate situation, something in her face made me respond. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, and if you enjoy hearing about life's unexpected turns, hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happened next when I decided to help this lost child while I myself had nowhere to go. Life before this Italian nightmare had been simple but fulfilling. As a widowed high school English teacher in a small town outside Boston, I lived modestly but comfortably in the same 2-bedroom house where I'd raised Brian. My husband John died when Brian was just 3, leaving me to navigate parenthood alone. Despite the challenges, Brian had been my pride and joy, the center of my universe. I'd poured everything into giving him opportunities, often working extra tutoring jobs to pay for his college education at a respectable state university. Things had changed in recent years. After graduation, Brian moved to New York for a finance job, and our weekly calls gradually became monthly, then sporadic. Still, when my phone rang at 2 a.m. 3 weeks ago with Brian's name flashing on the screen, I answered immediately, heart pounding. "Mom, I need help," he said, his voice tight with what I interpreted as fear. "I'm in Rome, and I'm in serious trouble. I can't explain over the phone, but I need you to come. Please." Any parent would understand what happened next. I withdrew $5,000 from my modest savings, arranged emergency leave from my teaching position, and booked the next flight to Rome. The school principal had been understanding I'd never taken unplanned leave in 20 years of teaching. When I arrived at Leonardo da Vinci Airport, exhausted after my first international flight, Brian seemed oddly energetic rather than troubled. He hugged me briefly, took my larger suitcase, and hurried me into a taxi. "Thanks for coming, Mom. I'll explain everything soon," he said, but immediately became absorbed in his phone, texting rapidly. The taxi took us to a boutique hotel near the Spanish Steps, far more luxurious than I would have chosen. When I questioned how he could afford it, Brian vaguely mentioned new connections and changed the subject. It wasn't until dinner that night that I met Isabella, Brian's girlfriend. Tall, impossibly stylish, with perfect English despite her Italian heritage, she barely concealed her disdain when Brian introduced us. "So nice to finally meet Brian's mother," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "He's told me so much about your quaint little life." Throughout dinner, Brian seemed distracted, whispering with Isabella in the corners of the restaurant while I awkwardly sipped wine alone. When I finally cornered him to ask about the emergency that had brought me across the ocean, he was evasive. "Business complications, Mom. Some investors are being difficult. Having family around helps show stability." Over the next 2 days, Brian's behavior became increasingly suspicious. He asked pointed questions about my life insurance policy, whether I'd updated my will, and if I had any additional savings for emergencies. Each time I pressed for details about his situation, he deflected, promising to explain when things settled down. On the 3rd morning, I woke to an empty hotel room. Brian's luggage was gone, along with Isabella's designer bags that had been stacked in the corner. My handbag had been emptied, passport still there thankfully, but wallet cleaned out except for a €100 note and my Massachusetts driver's license. My hands shaking, I called Brian's cell phone. Straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, finally sending desperate texts. Hours later, a single message appeared. "Sorry, Mom, but I need to live my life. Figure it out." The hotel manager informed me that the room was paid for only through that morning. With just €100 to my name in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language, panic overwhelmed me. I tried calling the American embassy, but after being put on hold for 45 minutes, my ancient phone's battery died. Clutching my small carry-on suitcase containing a few clothes and toiletries, I wandered through the streets of Rome in a daze. How could my son, my only child whom I'd given everything for, abandon me like this? What had I done wrong as a mother to deserve this betrayal? By late afternoon, exhaustion and hunger drove me to a park bench. That's where my tears finally broke through, and where, minutes later, a lost little girl named Sophia would approach me, changing the course of my life forever. "Are you lost too?" The small voice came again as I tried to compose myself. Looking up, I got my first proper look at the child. She was beautiful, with dark curly hair pulled back in a pristine white headband. Her blue dress appeared to be designer, not that I knew much about such things, but the quality was evident even to my untrained eye. She wore a small gold bracelet and spotlessly clean white shoes that had clearly never seen a public playground. "I'm not crying because I'm lost," I said, quickly wiping my tears. "I know exactly where I am." This was technically true, as I could see the park's name on a nearby sign, even if I had no idea what my next steps would be. "But are you lost, honey?" The girl nodded, her composure cracking slightly. "I'm Sophia. I'm 9 years old. My parents went to a business meeting this morning, and I stayed with Nina, but she got sick. They called another lady to watch me, but she took me for ice cream and then said she needed to make a call outside the shop, and she never came back." Her voice remained surprisingly steady, but her small hands twisted the fabric of her dress. My teacher instincts immediately kicked in despite my own predicament. "That's terrible, Sophia. How long have you been walking around alone?" "I don't know. A long time. My watch says 3 hours." She held up a small wrist with what appeared to be an actual Rolex, though surely it must be a child's replica. "I tried to find my way back, but everything looks different. Do you remember where you're staying?" I asked gently. Sophia's face scrunched in concentration. "It's a really big house with lots of paintings. Not a hotel. Daddy doesn't like hotels in Europe. He says they're too small. We're staying near a big fountain with horses." My mind, still foggy from shock, managed to recall that she likely meant the Trevi Fountain, one of Rome's most famous landmarks. "Do you know your parents' phone numbers?" I asked, hopefully. Sophia shook her head. "They're in my phone, but the lady has my backpack with my phone in it. I should have taken her to the police immediately, but 2 factors stopped me. First, my Italian was non-existent, and my experience with the embassy had already shown how difficult getting help might be. Second, and I'm ashamed to admit this, I was afraid of being dismissed or even suspected of something nefarious, given my own precarious situation." "Okay, Sophia," I said, standing up and forcing a reassuring smile. "I'll help you find your house. I'm Rachel, by the way. I'm a teacher back in America." "You're a teacher? What do you teach?" She fell in step beside me as naturally as if we'd known each other for years. "High school English literature," I replied, noticing how her posture immediately straightened at my profession, as if she were in class. "We tried the police station first, despite my reservations. As I feared, the language barrier proved insurmountable. The officers seemed dismissive of my broken attempts at communication, and when I couldn't provide an address for Sophia's residence, they motioned for us to sit in a waiting area. After 30 minutes without further acknowledgement, Sophia tugged my hand. "They're too busy," she whispered. "Let's try ourselves. I think I can find it if we go to the horse fountain." As we walked toward the Trevi Fountain area, I used my teaching skills to gently extract more information from Sophia. She was American, but traveled frequently. Her father owned buildings and her mother planned parties and went to meetings. They had been in Rome for 3 days and would leave in 2 more. "We came on our plane," she mentioned casually, as if everyone had a private jet. "Usually we stay longer places, but Daddy had to be in London next week." My suspicions about her family's wealth grew with each casual comment. Sophia spoke with the unconscious privilege of a child who had never known limitation. Despite this, there was something endearingly genuine about her, a brightness and curiosity that hadn't been dimmed by her advantaged upbringing. "What's your favorite book, Miss Rachel?" she asked as we navigated crowded tourist streets. "Call me Rachel," I said, touched by her formality. And that's a difficult question for an English teacher. "Maybe To Kill a Mockingbird. I haven't read that one yet. Is it good?" "I just finished Little Women." Our literary discussion carried us to the magnificent spectacle of the Trevi Fountain, where I spent a precious euro buying Sophia a gelato. My own stomach growled with hunger, but I ignored it. I needed to focus on helping this child first. Then I would confront my own disaster. The area surrounding the Trevi fountain teemed with tourists throwing coins over their shoulders into the water. Sophia and I stood at the edge of the crowd, her small hand clutched tightly in mine as she licked her gelato and scanned the surrounding streets. "Anything look familiar?" I asked, trying to keep the growing anxiety from my voice. The sun was beginning to set, and my precarious situation would only become more dangerous after dark. "Not really," Sophia admitted, then pointed suddenly. "But I remember that church. We walked past it yesterday when my dad was showing me the fountain." The church she indicated stood on a side street, its ornate facade distinguished from countless other Roman churches only by its particular arrangement of columns and a distinctive bell tower. "Great spotting," I encouraged, my teacher's voice automatically emerging. "Can you remember which way you went from there?" As we walked toward the church, Sophia continued to share snippets of her life that painted a picture of extraordinary wealth. She mentioned their summer house on a Greek island, her own pony in Connecticut, and how her mother's closet had a fingerprint thing to open it because her jewelry collection was so valuable. Each casual revelation formed a stark contrast to my own situation. The €100 in my pocket represented my entire net worth at this moment. My son had taken everything else, including the emergency credit card I'd brought. After finishing her gelato, Sophia grew quiet, and I noticed fatigue shadowing her face. We'd been walking for hours, and despite her apparent resilience, she was still a young child. "Are you getting tired, sweetheart?" I asked. "A little," she admitted, "but I'm okay. Nina says a lady never complains." "Well, this teacher says it's perfectly fine to say when you need a rest," I countered, leading her to a bench. "Let's sit for a moment and think." I spent 5 more precious euros on bottled water and a small package of crackers that we shared. As we sat, Sophia suddenly perked up. "Rachel, I just remembered something. Our house has a big stone lion by the front gate, and it's on a hill, with lots of stairs going up to it." This new information gave us direction, and we began methodically exploring the uphill streets branching off from the church. As we walked, Sophia told me more about her family. "My dad gets really angry sometimes," she confided quietly. "Not at me, usually. At people who work for him. He yells on the phone a lot." "And your mom?" I prompted gently. "She's very beautiful," Sophia said, as if this were her mother's primary characteristic. "She's always busy. She says idle hands make the devil's work." After nearly an hour of searching, Sophia suddenly squeezed my hand hard. "That street, with the yellow building at the corner. I think that's where we turned to go to our neighborhood." Following her lead, we turned onto a narrow street that soon opened into a broader avenue lined with imposing gates and high walls, clearly an exclusive residential enclave. Sophia moved more confidently now, pulling me along until she stopped abruptly in front of massive wrought iron gates with stone pillars on either side. One pillar was topped with an impressive stone lion. "This is it!" she exclaimed, relief flooding her features. Beyond the gates, I could see a sweeping driveway leading up to what could only be described as a palace, a 3-story Renaissance villa with meticulously manicured gardens surrounding it. Security cameras were mounted discreetly but obviously on the gate posts. A moment of panic seized me. How would these wealthy people react to a disheveled American woman bringing back their child? Would they assume I had somehow taken her? But before I could voice my concerns, Sophia pressed an intercom button on the gate pillar. She spoke rapidly in fluent Italian, surprising me completely. I'd assumed from our English conversations that she was monolingual like most American children. The gates swung open immediately, and a middle-aged man in what appeared to be a security uniform rushed down the driveway toward us. When he reached us, he knelt before Sophia, speaking in a mix of Italian and English, clearly asking if she was all right. Then he turned suspicious eyes on me, speaking too rapidly for me to understand. "This is Rachel," Sophia explained in English. "She helped me find my way home when I got lost. Juliana left me alone at the gelato place." The man's expression softened slightly toward me, though wariness remained. He spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder, and within moments, several staff members appeared, including a tearful young woman and an older, stern-looking woman in an impeccable suit. "Signorina Sophia, grazie a Dio," the younger woman cried, embracing Sophia while the older woman remained rigid, assessing me with cold calculation. "And you are?" the older woman asked in crisp, British accented English. Rachel Wilson, I replied, suddenly aware of my rumpled appearance and red-rimmed eyes. I found Sophia lost near the Trevi fountain. She said her caretaker left her. Juliana abandoned her, Sophia interjected firmly, pulling away from the young woman's embrace. This lady helped me when everyone else just walked past. She bought me gelato even though she doesn't have much money. I flushed at this accurate but embarrassing assessment of my financial situation. I see, the older woman said, her tone implying she saw far more than I'd like. I am Mrs. Augustine, the house manager. The Blackwoods are still in their business meetings and are unaware of this situation. Juliana claimed Sophia was napping in her room. The young woman who'd embraced Sophia began speaking rapidly in Italian, clearly defending herself, but Mrs. Augustine silenced her with a sharp gesture. We will discuss your negligence later, she said in English, presumably for my benefit. Take Signorina Sophia inside for a bath and meal immediately. As the young woman led Sophia toward the house, the girl turned back. Rachel has to stay until my parents come home. They need to thank her properly. Mrs. Augustine's mouth tightened, but she gave a curt nod. Very well. Please, Miss Wilson, follow me. We can offer you some refreshment while we verify your account. As we walked up the imposing driveway, I could feel the security guard following behind us, and I caught fragments of hushed Italian conversations among other staff members who had appeared. Through one exchange, I recognized the words genitori and chiamare, which I guessed meant Sophia's parents were being called. The magnificence of the villa's interior made me deeply conscious of my worn jeans and simple blouse. Priceless-looking artwork hung on walls covered in silk, and the marble floor beneath my sensible travel sneakers probably cost more than my annual teaching salary. Mrs. Augustine led me to a sitting room that, while clearly one of the less formal spaces in the house, still featured antique furniture that belonged in a museum. I perched awkwardly on the edge of a delicate-looking chair, afraid to fully relax into it. Some tea, perhaps? Mrs. Augustine offered with cool politeness. Yes, thank you, I replied, suddenly aware of how parched I was. As she left the room, I heard her instructing someone in Italian, her voice low and suspicious. I caught Sophia's name and what sounded like Americano and Polizia. My heart rate accelerated. Were they considering calling the police on me? The irony would be bitter indeed. Left alone, I contemplated my surreal situation. In the space of one day, I had gone from abandoned and destitute to sitting in what was clearly the home of extraordinarily wealthy people. Yet my fundamental problem remained unchanged. I still had nowhere to go, barely any money, and a son who had betrayed me completely. The opulence surrounding me only emphasized the depth of my own predicament. In hours, I would need to leave this mansion and face my grim reality again. The tea arrived in a silver service carried by a young man in a crisp uniform who avoided eye contact as he placed it on the marble-top table before me. The delicate porcelain cup, when I examined it, bore a pattern I recognized from Museum Exhibit Sev, if I wasn't mistaken, probably antique and worth thousands. My hands trembled slightly as I poured, acutely aware that breaking anything in this room would create a debt I could never repay. Through the open doorway, I caught glimpses of the villa's interior. Soaring frescoed ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that belonged in the Uffizi rather than a private residence. After about 20 minutes, Mrs. Augustine returned with another woman who introduced herself as Maria, Sophia's regular nanny who had fallen ill that morning. Signorina Sophia is asking for you, Maria said, her English heavily accented but clear. She insists you join her for her dinner. Before I could respond, another voice spoke from the doorway, sharp, commanding, and distinctly American. Where is my daughter? And who authorized a stranger to enter our home? The woman who stepped into the room was perhaps 40, strikingly beautiful with dark hair pulled into an immaculate chignon, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my mortgage payments. She carried herself with the confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege, her gaze sweeping critically over me before turning to Mrs. Augustine. Mrs. Blackwood. This is Miss Wilson. Mrs. Augustine explained deferentially. She helped Signorina Sophia find her way home after the incident with Juliana. Incident? The woman repeated coldly. Juliana abandoned Sophia at a gelato shop near the Trevi fountain, I interjected, unable to contain myself. Your daughter was wandering alone for hours before I found her." Catherine Blackwood's perfectly made-up face registered momentary shock before composing itself again. "And you are?" "Rachel Wilson. I'm an American tourist. I deliberately omitted the circumstances that had left me alone in Rome." "I see," she said, in the same tone Mrs. Augustine had used, suggesting she saw far more than I was telling. "And you brought my daughter home instead of taking her to the authorities because?" Her implication was clear, and it stung. "We tried the police station. No one seemed particularly interested in helping, and Sophia thought she could find her way home if we went to the Trevi Fountain area." "And what compensation are you expecting for this?" "Good deed?" Mrs. Blackwood asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. Before I could form an indignant response, Sophia burst into the room, now dressed in clean clothes, her hair damp from a bath. "Mommy, you're back." She threw her arms around her mother's waist. Catherine Blackwood's demeanor softened momentarily as she placed a manicured hand on her daughter's head, though she didn't bend down to return the embrace. "I hear you had quite an adventure today," she said. "Juliana left me all alone," Sophia said earnestly. "She said she'd be right back, but she never came. Rachel found me crying on a bench and helped me. She's a teacher in America, and she knows all about books, and she spent her money buying me gelato even though she doesn't have much." I felt my cheeks burning again at this repeated reference to my financial status. "Did she?" Mrs. Blackwood's gaze returned to me, assessing. "Well, we are appreciative, Miss Wilson. Our security staff will drive you back to your hotel, and of course, we'd like to offer you something for your trouble." She reached for her handbag, clearly intending to extract cash. My back stiffened. "That's not necessary." I was happy to help Sophia. "I insist," she said, pulling out a wallet. "It's the least we can do." Something in her tone, the implication that this transaction would conclude our interaction and absolve them of any further obligation, sparked a flare of defiance in me. I'd spent a lifetime being underestimated by wealthy parents who thought teacher appreciation gift cards could compensate for their absence in their children's lives. "Actually, if you could just call me a taxi, that would be sufficient," I said, rising from my chair. "I'm glad Sophia is safe." "Rachel, you can't go," Sophia protested, breaking away from her mother. "You have to stay until Daddy comes home. He'll want to thank you too." "Your father is in meetings until late, Sophia," Mrs. Blackwood said firmly. "Miss Wilson surely has her own plans." The bitter irony of that statement, given that my only plan was figuring out how to survive until I could somehow contact the embassy again, must have shown on my face, because Mrs. Blackwood's expression changed subtly. "Unless, is there some difficulty with your accommodations, Miss Wilson?" The question hung in the air, humiliating in its perception. Before I could formulate a response that preserved my dignity, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as a deep voice called out from the hallway. "Catherine, where's Sophia?" Augustine said there was some kind of situation. The man who appeared in the doorway was tall and commanding, with salt and pepper hair and the physique of someone who refuses to surrender to middle age. His bespoke suit couldn't disguise the athletic build beneath it, and his face, though lined with the beginnings of age, remained strikingly handsome. His eyes landed first on his daughter, softening with relief, then shifted to his wife, and finally to me. When our gazes met, his expression transformed through a sequence of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, astonishment. "Rachel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel Wilson? Is that really you?" The room fell silent as I stared back at him, my mind struggling to process what was happening. After 27 years, I was looking into the eyes of Maxwell Blackwood, the man who had broken my heart in college, and, though he didn't know it, the father of the son who had just abandoned me in Rome. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. The air in the ornate room seemed to crystallize around us as Maxwell Blackwood and I stared at each other, the decades falling away like autumn leaves. "You two know each other?" Catherine Blackwood's voice sliced through the silence, sharp with suspicion. Maxwell remained frozen, his expression locked in disbelief. "Rachel Wilson," he repeated, not a question this time, but a confirmation to himself. "Hello, Max," I said, using the name I'd called him in college, Before he had become the business titan whose name occasionally appeared in news articles I quickly turned past, the wound still too tender even after all these years. Sophia looked between us with undisguised fascination. "You know my teacher friend, Daddy?" This innocent question seemed to break whatever spell had held Maxwell immobile. He blinked, composing himself with visible effort. "We knew each other a long time ago. In college," he explained, his eyes never leaving my face. "Rachel was studying literature at Boston University when I was finishing my MBA at Harvard." "Small world," Catherine commented, her tone suggesting it was entirely too small for her liking. Her eyes narrowed as she observed her husband's reaction. "How fortunate that of all the people in Rome, our daughter found your acquaintance." The implication was clear, and I felt heat rising to my face. "It wasn't planned, if that's what you're suggesting," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. I had no idea whose home this was until this moment. "Of course not," Maxwell said quickly, finally turning to his wife. Rachel was never the calculating type. He gestured toward a larger sitting room visible through another doorway. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable?" Catherine's perfect features arranged themselves into a social smile that didn't reach her eyes. "By all means. Sophia, darling, why don't you go with Maria for your dinner? The adults need to talk." "But I want to stay with Rachel," Sophia protested. "She's my friend." "Sophia," Maxwell said gently but firmly, "please do as your mother says. I promise Miss Wilson won't leave without saying goodbye." With obvious reluctance, Sophia allowed herself to be led away by her nanny, looking back over her shoulder until she disappeared around a corner. In the larger sitting room, with its museum-quality Renaissance paintings and antique furniture, Maxwell directed me to a comfortable sofa while Catherine perched on an armchair opposite, her posture rigid with displeasure. "Well," Maxwell said, remaining standing, "this is unexpected." "That's one word for it," I agreed. "Perhaps you could explain exactly how you came to find our daughter?" Catherine pressed. I recounted the events of the afternoon, omitting only my own desperate circumstances. As I spoke, I could feel Maxwell's eyes on me, studying the changes 27 years had wrought. When I finished, Maxwell shook his head in disgust. "This Juliana person will never work in this city again," he said darkly. "We'll make sure of it." "What I don't understand," Catherine interjected, "is why you were alone in a park in a foreign city, crying," according to Sophia. The question hung in the air. Unavoidable. I took a deep breath. "I was abandoned here by my son," I said simply. "He brought me to Rome, claiming he needed help, then disappeared with my money and credit cards." "My God, Rachel," Maxwell murmured. "That's terrible." "Your son?" Catherine asked, her gaze sharpening. "How old is he?" The question sent a jolt through me. I looked at Maxwell, wondering if he had done the mental calculation yet. 27. I answered quietly. Maxwell's expression didn't change, but I saw his hand tighten on the back of the chair he stood behind. 27 years since we'd parted. The implication hung in the air like smoke. "His name is Brian," I added, watching Maxwell carefully. "Brian Wilson." "Wilson," Maxwell repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "So you married after." "I was already pregnant when you left," I said, the words emerging before I could consider their impact. "I didn't know it yet. By the time I found out, you were engaged to someone else." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine rose abruptly from her chair, her face pale beneath its perfect makeup. "Are you saying," she began, her voice trembling with either rage or shock, "that your son, the one who abandoned you, is my husband's child?" "I never told him," I said, looking directly at Maxwell, whose face had gone ashen. "I never asked for anything from you, Max." "This is absurd," Catherine snapped. "This woman shows up with our daughter, and suddenly she's claiming to have your love child? It's obviously a setup." "It's not," I said firmly. I had no idea who Sophia's parents were. I had no idea Maxwell lived in Italy or that he'd be here. The last thing I want is to complicate anyone's life. "If you could just call me a taxi, I'll—" "You're not going anywhere," Maxwell interrupted, his voice hoarse. "Not until we sort this out." He turned to his wife. Catherine, please give us a moment. If you think I'm leaving you alone with her, please, he said, his tone soft but unyielding. Just a few minutes. With a look that could have frozen the Mediterranean, Catherine stalked from the room, slamming the door behind her. Maxwell collapsed into the chair his wife had vacated, burying his face in his hands for a moment before looking up at me. Brian, he said, testing the name. My son is named Brian. Yes, and you never told me. All these years. You made your choice very clear, Max, I replied, old pain resurfacing. You said your family would disown you if you stayed with the scholarship girl from Dorchester. You said you had responsibilities. 3 weeks later, I saw the engagement announcement in the Globe, you and the banking heiress. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to tell me I had a child. His voice rose, then immediately softened as he visibly reined in his emotions. I'm sorry. I can't believe this. I have a 27-year-old son I've never met, a son who just stole my savings and abandoned me in a foreign country. I reminded him bitterly. Maybe you didn't miss out on much. Don't say that, Maxwell said, rising to pace the room. There must be some explanation. Some reason he would do this. The small kindness in his defense of a son he'd never met nearly undid me. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I blinked them back furiously. Whatever his reasons, they don't justify what he did, I said. I gave him everything I had, Max. Everything. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs to put him through college. I never remarried because I was so focused on giving him a good life, and he left me with nothing. Maxwell stopped pacing, his expression resolute. We'll find him. I have resources. The door burst open, and Catherine returned, her composure recovered, her expression glacial. Sophia is asking for you again, she said to me, not looking at her husband. She refuses to eat until she sees you. I stood, grateful for the interruption. Of course. We're not finished discussing this, Maxwell said, the business titan now fully present in his commanding tone. Yes, we are, I replied with equal firmness. I didn't come here looking for anything from you, Max. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but what's done is done. As I followed Catherine from the room, I could feel Maxwell's gaze burning into my back. Whatever course this extraordinary day had set us on, I knew our lives would never be the same again. Dinner with Sophia provided a brief respite from the emotional maelstrom. She chatted happily about her school in Connecticut, her friends, and her pony named Starlight, seemingly oblivious to the tension that had engulfed the adults in her life. I found myself studying her features, searching for any resemblance to Brian. There was little to find. Sophia clearly took after her mother in appearance, though her outgoing personality and curious mind reminded me of Maxwell as a young man, before ambition and family expectations had hardened him. After Sophia had been tucked in for the night, insisting on a story from me, which I provided by reciting from memory a passage from The Secret Garden, I found myself once again in the formal sitting room with both Blackwoods. Maxwell had clearly been arguing with his wife, if their flushed faces and tense postures were any indication. We've had a long discussion, Maxwell began, his tone businesslike, and we agree that we need to understand the full situation before making any decisions. We've also confirmed your identity, Catherine added coldly. My husband has verified that you were indeed at Boston University when he was at Harvard, and that you were involved. How thorough, I commented, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. Rachel, Maxwell said softly, please understand our position. This is unexpected, to say the least. You think it's unexpected for you? I asked. 12 hours ago, I was abandoned and penniless in a foreign country. Now I'm sitting in a mansion, discovering that my son's father is a billionaire who didn't know he had a son. I'd say I win the unexpected day contest. A ghost of a smile touched Maxwell's lips, reminding me painfully of the man I'd once loved, the one who could laugh at himself before wealth and power had insulated him from life's ordinary humiliations. Fair enough, he conceded. Perhaps we should start at the beginning. The beginning. Boston, 27 years ago. I was a junior on a full academic scholarship, working part-time in the university library to cover expenses. Maxwell was completing his MBA, already earmarked for success in his family's real estate development firm. We met when he came to the library, researching property values for his thesis. Our connection was immediate and unlikely the working-class girl from Dorchester and the heir to one of Boston's oldest fortunes. For 8 months, we existed in a bubble of our own making, stealing weekends in Vermont, hiding from his family's expectations and my academic responsibilities. You never told me how serious those expectations were, I said, the old hurt resurfacing. Not until the end. Maxwell's eyes clouded with memory. I was a coward, he admitted. I let my father control me with threats of disinheritance, convince me that my infatuation with you was just rebellion. Was it? I asked quietly. He met my gaze directly. No. What I felt for you was real. But I wasn't strong enough to choose you over everything I'd been raised to value. He glanced at Catherine, who sat rigid and silent. My father arranged my introduction to Catherine's family. The merger of our companies created what became Blackwood International. And I discovered I was pregnant 2 weeks after your engagement appeared in the society pages, I continued. I considered trying to reach you, but it was clear you'd made your choice, so I made mine. I left school for a semester, had Brian, then returned to finish my degree with my baby in tow. That must have been incredibly difficult, Maxwell said, genuine admiration in his voice. It was, I acknowledged, but I had help. My mother watched Brian while I was in class, until she died when he was 3. After that, it was just us. And you never married? Catherine asked, speaking for the first time since the conversation began. No. There were relationships, but nothing serious. Brian was my priority. Yet he abandoned you, she observed with clinical detachment. Despite your sacrifices, the blunt assessment stung, but I couldn't deny its accuracy. Yes. Maxwell leaned forward. Tell us about him, about Brian. So I did. I told them about Brian's childhood, his intelligence, his charm, his early fascination with money and status that had always puzzled me. I described his academic achievements, his scholarship to NYU, his entry-level position at a financial services firm that had seemed so promising. The past few years, he's grown more distant, I concluded. When he called saying he was in trouble in Rome, it was the first time in months he'd reached out. I never questioned why he needed me to come in person. And you have no idea where he is now? Maxwell asked. None. His last text just said he needed to live his life, and I should figure it out. The memory brought a fresh wave of pain. He's never been cruel before. Distant, yes, but not cruel. Maxwell exchanged a look with his wife, some unspoken communication passing between them. Rachel, he said carefully, there's something else we need to discuss. Something that might explain Brian's behavior. My heart clenched. What is it? Approximately 6 months ago, Blackwood International experienced a security breach. Someone accessed confidential files about upcoming acquisitions. We traced the breach to a specific terminal but couldn't identify the individual responsible. What does this have to do with Brian? I asked, though a sick feeling was already building in my stomach. 3 months ago, I was approached by a young financial analyst who seemed to know details about our European expansion plans, details that weren't public. He presented himself as having insider connections and offered to provide ongoing intelligence for a percentage. Maxwell's expression darkened. I refused and had security escort him out. I never saw his face clearly. The meeting was in a dim restaurant, but his name was Brian. The room seemed to tilt around me. That can't be a coincidence. No, Maxwell agreed grimly. I think our son has known about me for some time, and rather than approach me directly, he's been trying to profit from the connection. But how would he have found out about you? I asked. I never told him. I don't keep any mementos. Any photographs, tax records, Catherine suggested coolly. Birth certificates, college alumni databases. In the digital age, secrets don't stay buried. I thought of Brian's increasing fascination with wealth over the past few years, his questions about his father that I'd always deflected, his move to New York where Blackwood International had its headquarters. If you're right, I said slowly, then bringing me to Rome. Meeting this Isabella was likely part of a larger scheme, Maxwell finished, one that involved using you in some way. The full realization of my son's betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. Brian hadn't just abandoned me, he'd deliberately lured me into a foreign country as part of some plan involving his biological father. The depth of calculation required staggered me. "I need to find him," I said, my voice barely audible. "I need to understand why." "We will find him," Maxwell said, his tone brooking no argument. "But first, you need rest. You'll stay here tonight." Catherine stiffened, but didn't object. "I couldn't possibly," I began. "You have nowhere else to go," Maxwell pointed out gently. "Your passport and return ticket are still valid, I presume. But until we locate Brian and your belongings, you're stranded. Let us help you, Rachel. Please." The kindness in his voice, so reminiscent of the young man I'd loved, broke through my last defenses. Exhaustion, emotional and physical, crashed over me in a wave that left me swaying slightly in my seat. "Thank you," I managed. "Just for tonight." As a housekeeper, led me to a guest suite larger than my entire home in Massachusetts. I caught a glimpse of Maxwell and Catherine through a doorway, locked in intense conversation. The ice in Catherine's demeanor had melted into something more vulnerable. Hurt, perhaps. Or fear. Maxwell reached for her hand, but she pulled away, leaving him standing alone as she walked from the room. In the luxurious bathroom attached to my suite, I stared at my reflection, barely recognizing the haggard woman who looked back at me. In the space of 24 hours, my world had shattered and reformed into something unrecognizable. My son was not who I thought he was. His father had re-entered my life in the most improbable way imaginable. And tomorrow would bring revelations I couldn't begin to predict. As I sank into sheets finer than any I'd ever touched, I wondered what Sophia would think if she knew the woman she'd found crying on a bench might be her half-brother's mother. The thought followed me into troubled dreams of labyrinths and stone lions that came to life, roaring warnings I couldn't quite understand. Morning brought clarity, if not comfort. After a night in which exhaustion battled with anxiety for dominance over my sleep, I woke to sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains and the distant sound of Sophia practicing piano somewhere in the massive villa. A discreet knock announced the arrival of a maid bearing a breakfast tray and fresh clothing, simple but clearly expensive items that somehow appeared to be exactly my size. I ate ravenously, realizing I'd had almost nothing the day before, and dressed in the provided clothes, leaving my rumpled travel outfit draped over a chair. When I emerged from the guest suite, Mrs. Augustine was waiting to escort me to Maxwell's study. The house in daylight revealed even more opulence than I'd registered the previous evening, museum-quality art on every wall, furnishings that spanned centuries of craftsmanship, all arranged with a designer's eye that balanced luxury with taste. Maxwell's study occupied a corner of the villa with windows overlooking both the formal gardens and the Roman skyline beyond. He sat behind an antique desk, speaking into a phone in rapid Italian, while Catherine stood by a sideboard, pouring coffee from a silver service. Both looked up when I entered. "Rachel," Maxwell said, ending his call. "I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," I replied honestly. "Thank you for the clothes." "My assistant guessed your size," Catherine said, handing me a porcelain cup of coffee. Her manner remained cool but had lost some of its outright hostility. She's usually accurate. "We have news," Maxwell said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "My security team has been working through the night." My heart pounded. "You found Brian?" "Yes," Maxwell confirmed grimly. "And I'm afraid the situation is more complicated than we anticipated." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside were surveillance photos showing Brian entering a high-end hotel with a young woman I assumed was Isabella, along with what appeared to be banking records and email printouts. "Brian Wilson has been working for Castellano Investments for approximately 18 months, Maxwell explained. "It's a firm owned by Isabella's father, Antonio Castellano, one of my chief competitors, and frankly, a man not known for ethical business practices." "I don't understand," I said, staring at the documents. "What does this have to do with Brian abandoning me?" "Brian has been part of a sophisticated corporate espionage operation," Maxwell said bluntly. "We've found evidence that he's been accessing Blackwood International systems using credentials stolen from one of our executives. He's been selling information to Castellano for months." The room seemed to spin around me. That's impossible." "Brian wouldn't." "He did," Catherine said, her tone gentler than I'd yet heard from her. And there's more. We believe bringing you to Rome was part of a larger scheme. Maxwell picked up the narrative. Our security team found emails between Brian and Isabella discussing a distraction that would keep my attention focused elsewhere while they executed the final stage of their plan. Me, I whispered. I was the distraction. Not just you, Maxwell corrected, his expression darkening. They had a more elaborate plan involving you that, thankfully, they didn't execute. What do you mean? Maxwell and Catherine exchanged glances before he continued. There are emails discussing an accident that would trigger an insurance payout. Brian was very specific about confirming your policy details. Horror washed over me as the implication became clear. He was planning to harm me? For insurance money? We don't know how serious those plans were, Maxwell said quickly, but the correspondence suggests it was at least discussed. Tears blurred my vision. The son I had raised, the child I had given everything for, had not only betrayed me, but potentially contemplated something unthinkably worse. It was beyond comprehension. Where is he now? I managed to ask. That's our current challenge, Maxwell replied. Our intelligence indicates Brian and Isabella flew to the Cayman Islands yesterday, likely with data they've stolen about our upcoming European acquisitions. We believe they've accessed banking information that could allow them to divert funds during pending transactions. How much money are we talking about? I asked faintly. Potentially? Millions. The scope of Brian's betrayal expanded exponentially with each revelation. This wasn't just abandoning his mother, this was calculated corporate theft on a massive scale. What happens now? I asked. My team is locating them as we speak, Maxwell said with quiet confidence. We have resources in the Caymans. Once we confirm their location, we'll have them detained and returned to Italy. You mean arrested? I said, reality crashing down on me. My son is going to be arrested for corporate espionage. That depends, Maxwell said carefully. On what? On whether we choose to press charges, Catherine interjected, or handle this privately. I looked between them, trying to understand what they were suggesting. You would cover this up? Not cover it up, Maxwell corrected. But there are alternatives to criminal prosecution that might be more productive. Rehabilitation programs. Restitution arrangements. Why would you do that? I asked, bewildered. After what he tried to do to your company? To your family? Maxwell's expression softened. Because regardless of how we found out about him, Brian is my son too, Rachel. I've missed 27 years of his life. I don't want the next phase of our relationship to begin with me sending him to prison. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks at this unexpected compassion. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, he replied. Just know that we'll find him, and we'll deal with this situation together. Together, Catherine echoed, surprising me. When I glanced at her questioningly, she gave a small, tight smile. This isn't how I imagined our family would expand. But here we are. Before I could respond, Maxwell's phone chimed. He answered, listened intently for a moment, then said something in Italian before hanging up. They've found them, he announced. Brian and Isabella are staying at a private villa in Grand Cayman. My security team is coordinating with local authorities to detain them until we arrive. We're going to the Cayman Islands? I asked incredulously. My plane is already being prepared, Maxwell confirmed. We leave in 2 hours. As this information sank in, another voice joined the conversation. Can I come too? Sophia stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed bear. I've never been to the Caymans. Sophia, Catherine admonished. You were supposed to be at your piano lesson. I heard you talking about a trip, Sophia said, approaching me and leaning against my chair with the easy affection children sometimes develop for adults they've only just met. And I want to go with Rachel. This isn't a vacation, sweetheart, Maxwell explained gently. It's a business matter. Is it about Rachel's son? Sophia asked with the unnerving perceptiveness of children. I heard Maria talking to the cook. She said, Rachel's son is actually your son too, which would make him my brother. Is that true? The adults in the room froze, exchanging alarmed glances. It was I who recovered first. That's a complicated question, Sophia, I said carefully. But yes, it appears that Mr. Blackwood is Brian's biological father. Cool, Sophia exclaimed. I always wanted a brother. Can I meet him? Perhaps someday. Maxwell hedged. Right now, Brian has made some serious mistakes that we need to address. Did he do something bad? Sophia pressed. Yes, I admitted, seeing no point in lying. He did something very wrong, and now he needs to face the consequences and hopefully learn from his mistakes. Sophia considered this, then nodded sagely. Like when I drew on the Ming vase and had to write an apology letter to the museum where Daddy donated it. Despite everything, I couldn't suppress a small laugh at this child's perspective on relative misdeeds. Something like that, but much more serious. Sophia, Catherine interrupted firmly, Mrs. Petrova is waiting for you in the music room. We'll discuss this later. With obvious reluctance, Sophia hugged me quickly before leaving, whispering, I hope you stay with us forever, Rachel. Her innocent wish pierced my heart with its impossibility. Once Brian was found and this situation resolved, I would return to my modest life in Massachusetts, while the Blackwoods continued their privileged existence. The gulf between our worlds remained as vast as it had been 27 years ago. As if reading my thoughts, Maxwell said quietly, Nothing has to be decided right away, Rachel. Let's focus on finding Brian first. I nodded, gathering my composure. Yes. Let's find my son. The Blackwoods' private jet resembled a luxury apartment more than any aircraft I'd ever imagined. With plush leather seating, a dining area, and even a small bedroom compartment, it made first-class commercial travel look like a bus station bench. During the flight, Maxwell briefed me on what to expect. His security team had placed Brian and Isabella under discreet surveillance at their rented villa in Grand Cayman. Local authorities were cooperating but had agreed to allow Maxwell to handle the situation privately first, given his considerable influence and investments in the area. They don't know we're coming, he explained as our plane began its descent. The element of surprise is crucial. I gazed out the window at the impossibly blue Caribbean waters, trying to reconcile the impending confrontation with my son against the paradisiacal backdrop. How had our lives led to this moment? A convoy of black SUVs met us at the private airfield. The drive to Brian's location passed in tense silence, Catherine occasionally checking her phone while Maxwell reviewed information from his security team. I sat motionless, rehearsing what I would say to the son who had betrayed me so completely. The villa where Brian was staying sat on a secluded stretch of beachfront, a modern structure of glass and concrete that seemed to rise organically from the white sand. As our vehicles pulled up to the gated entrance, I glimpsed movement inside, figures rushing away from windows. They've spotted us, Maxwell observed grimly. Stay behind me, please. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding the building while Maxwell, Catherine, and I approached the front door, accompanied by two stern-looking men in suits. Maxwell nodded, and one of them pressed the intercom. Mr. Wilson, the security officer said calmly. Please open the door. We know you're inside, and the property is surrounded. Silence greeted this announcement, followed by muffled arguing from within. Finally, the door opened to reveal Isabella, beautiful, composed, but with fear visible beneath her haughty expression. Mr. Blackwood, she acknowledged coolly. This is an unexpected pleasure. Where is he? Maxwell demanded, brushing past her into the villa's spacious living area. Brian emerged from an adjacent room, his confident facade crumbling slightly at the sight of our unlikely trio. He was dressed in expensive resort wear, a tumbler of something amber in his hand. Seeing him healthy, tanned, clearly living in luxury while I had been left destitute unleashed a storm of emotions I could barely contain. Mom, he said, genuine shock in his voice. What are you doing here? With them? Hello, Brian, I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Surprise. His gaze shifted to Maxwell, comprehension dawning in his eyes. So you found out that you're my biological father? Maxwell confirmed. Yes, we've established that rather conclusively. Brian's lips curved in a smirk that I'd never seen before, a cold, calculating expression that transformed his familiar features into those of a stranger. Well, this is awkward. Family reunion in the Caymans. Should we break out the cocktails? This isn't a social call, Catherine said icily. We know exactly what you've been doing, Mr. Wilson. Isabella moved to Brian's side, placing a restraining hand on his arm. Whatever you think you know, we know everything, Maxwell interrupted. The corporate espionage, the data theft, the funds you were planning to divert from our European acquisitions, and most disturbingly, he added, his voice hardening, the discussions about using Rachel as a distraction, including the potential for an accident that would conveniently trigger her life insurance policy. Brian blanched slightly at this last revelation, but quickly recovered. You can't prove any of that. Actually, we can, Maxwell countered. Your emails, bank transfers, travel records, we have it all. The only question remaining is whether we turn this evidence over to international authorities or handle it privately. A flash of fear crossed Brian's face before he mastered it. He turned to me, his expression shifting to one of injured innocence. Mom, you can't believe I'd ever actually hurt you. That was Isabella's idea, and I never took it seriously. Isabella jerked away from him, outraged. You liar! You were the one who suggested using her for the distraction. As they turned on each other, I stepped forward, holding up my hand for silence. Stop. Just stop. To my surprise, they did. Brian, I said quietly, I need to understand. All these years, I gave you everything I had. I worked multiple jobs to put you through college. I postponed my own dreams to ensure you had every opportunity. Why would you do this? Was it just money? Brian's face contorted, the facade of sophisticated con man dropping away to reveal something raw and ugly beneath. Just money? Do you have any idea what it was like growing up with nothing, while my biological father was living like this? He gestured around at the luxury villa. I discovered who he was during my sophomore year of college. A classmate was doing a project on Blackwood International, and there was his photo, same eyes, same jawline as me. It didn't take much research to confirm it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. What would have been the point? Brian retorted. You'd chosen to keep me away from all of this, to raise me in mediocrity when I could have had everything. The casual cruelty of his assessment of our life together struck me like a physical blow. Mediocrity? Brian, we had a home filled with love. You had opportunities. Don't. He cut me off. Don't pretend our life in that tiny house with secondhand everything was somehow noble. You deprived me of my birthright because of your pride. I deprived you of nothing. I shot back, anger finally overtaking hurt. I gave you a childhood where you were valued for who you were, not what you could inherit. I taught you to work hard, to earn respect, to live with integrity. Clearly, those lessons didn't take. Brian laughed bitterly. Integrity doesn't buy private jets, Mother. No, Maxwell interjected, his voice deceptively calm. In my experience, it's integrity that builds empires that last generations. Schemes like yours? They might yield quick profits, but they inevitably end exactly like this, with exposure and disgrace. For the first time, Brian seemed unsettled by the contempt in Maxwell's tone. You have no right to judge me. You abandoned us before I was even born. I didn't know about you, Maxwell replied evenly. That's a fact you conveniently ignored while planning your revenge. If you'd approached me directly, told me who you were, things might have been very different. Different? How? Brian challenged. Would you have welcomed your bastard son into the Blackwood dynasty? Introduced me to society as your firstborn? Somehow I doubt that. Catherine, who had remained silent during this exchange, stepped forward. You'll never know now, will you? Because instead of acting with honesty or courage, you chose deception and theft. You're standing here in a villa paid for with stolen information, beside a woman who is helping you plot against your own mother. Her gaze flicked dismissively to Isabella, who, by the way, has never loved you. She's been reporting directly to her father throughout your entire relationship. Isabella's face drained of color. That's not. Please, Catherine cut her off. Antonio Castellano and I have moved in the same social circles for decades. Did you really think he wouldn't tell me about his secret weapon against my husband's company? He was quite proud of how his daughter had ensnared the illegitimate Blackwood heir. Brian turned to Isabella, betrayal written across his features. Is that true? Isabella lifted her chin defiantly. Business is business, Caro. My father needed inside information. And you were so eager to prove yourself, so hungry for approval from anyone with wealth and power. You were almost too easy. The cruel assessment seemed to deflate Brian, and for a moment, I glimpsed vulnerability beneath his arrogance, the little boy who had always tried too hard to impress others, desperate for the validation he never felt he received from me. So what happens now? He asked, addressing Maxwell rather than me. Prison? That depends, Maxwell replied, on whether you're willing to accept an alternative. Brian eyed him warily. What kind of alternative? Comprehensive rehabilitation. Maxwell said firmly. Financial restitution. Psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Community service. Supervised probation for a minimum of 5 years. And if I refuse, then we turn over our evidence to the authorities in Italy, the United States, and here in the Caymans. The combined charges would likely result in at least 15 years imprisonment. Brian paled. You'd do that to your own son? I'd hold my son accountable for his actions, Maxwell corrected. As any responsible father would. A tense silence fell over the room as Brian appeared to calculate his options. Finally, he said, and Isabella? What happens to her? That's between her and her father, Catherine replied coolly, though I imagine Antonio will be quite displeased that his scheme has been exposed. As if on cue, Isabella's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and visibly flinched before silencing it. I'll take the alternative, Brian said quickly, a hint of desperation entering his voice. The rehabilitation, whatever you want. Maxwell nodded, unsurprised. We'll make the arrangements immediately. You'll be returning to the United States tonight, under supervision. Throughout this negotiation, I had remained silent, watching my son, this stranger, wearing Brian's face bargain for his freedom. Now, as security personnel moved in to escort him from the room, I stepped forward. Brian, I said quietly, I need you to look at me. Reluctantly, he met my gaze. I want you to know that despite everything, despite the theft, the lies, the abandonment, I still love you. I always will. That's what being a parent means. But I am profoundly disappointed in the man you've chosen to become. Something flickered in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or regret. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might show some genuine remorse. Instead, he said, you should have told me who my father was. Everything would have been different. As he was led away, Isabella following with a separate security detail, I felt Maxwell's hand on my shoulder. He's wrong, you know, he said softly. You gave him everything that truly matters. The fact that he couldn't recognize it is his failing, not yours. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, watching as my only child was taken away to face the consequences of his actions. Catherine approached, her expression softer than I'd yet seen it. For what it's worth, she said, I believe you raised him with love and the best intentions. Some people simply make poor choices despite excellent parenting. Her unexpected kindness broke the last of my composure. As tears began to fall, I felt myself enveloped in a gentle embrace, not from Maxwell, as I might have expected, but from Catherine. Over her shoulder, I saw Maxwell watching us, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face. In that moment, surrounded by a family that wasn't mine yet somehow was, I realized that this painful confrontation wasn't an ending, but rather the beginning of something I couldn't yet define. 1 month later, I stood on the terrace of my new apartment in Rome's Trastevere neighborhood, watching the sunset paint the ancient city in hues of gold and amber. The space was modest by Blackwood standards but luxurious by mine, a 2-bedroom flat in a restored 17th-century building, with terracotta floors and a small but well-appointed kitchen where I was learning to cook Italian dishes. After the confrontation in the Caymans, events had moved with dizzying speed. Brian was enrolled in an intensive rehabilitation program in Switzerland, a facility that specialized in treating privileged young people who had lost their moral compass. Maxwell's legal team had arranged a complex agreement that would keep Brian out of prison while ensuring he faced significant consequences for his actions. I had returned briefly to Boston to resign from my teaching position and pack up the belongings I wished to keep from my small house, which I'd decided to sell. The school principal had been understanding, especially after Maxwell made a substantial donation to fund a new English department initiative in my name. My return to Italy hadn't been a foregone conclusion. I had options. Maxwell had offered financial support that would allow me to live comfortably anywhere I chose. But it was Sophia who had ultimately influenced my decision with her tearful plea during my farewell dinner. "Please don't go away forever, Rachel. I just found you." The Blackwoods had surprised me by proposing a compromise, a position with Maxwell's educational foundation that provided underprivileged Italian children with access to English language instruction. The role utilized my teaching experience while giving me purpose and independence. The apartment came with the job, they insisted, though I suspected it was far nicer than what other foundation employees received. My relationship with the Blackwoods had evolved in ways I never could have predicted. Catherine, initially so hostile, had gradually warmed to me as she observed my positive influence on Sophia, who had attached herself to me with the fierce devotion children sometimes develop for adults who take them seriously. We weren't friends, exactly, but we had developed a mutual respect that occasionally ventured into genuine warmth. Maxwell was more complicated. The chemistry that had drawn us together in college still simmered beneath the surface of our interactions, but we both recognized the impossibility and impropriety of exploring it. Instead, we were building something perhaps more valuable, a partnership focused on helping our son heal while forging a relationship with him built on honesty rather than deception. A knock at my door interrupted my reverie. I opened it to find Sophia bouncing excitedly on her toes, accompanied by Mrs. Augustine. "Rachel," Sophia exclaimed, "Daddy said I could have dinner with you if it's okay. Can we make pasta? I told Mrs. Augustine you're teaching me to cook." Mrs. Augustine, now considerably warmer toward me than during our first meeting, smiled apologetically. Miss Sophia was most insistent. "Mr. Blackwood thought you might enjoy the company, but of course if you had other plans." "No plans that can't accommodate pasta making," I assured her, ushering Sophia inside. "Though I'm still learning myself, so no guarantees on the results." "That's okay," Sophia said cheerfully, heading straight for the kitchen where she knew I kept the pasta machine. "Trying new things is how we learn, even if we make mistakes." "That's what you taught me." As Mrs. Augustine departed with arrangements to collect Sophia later, I marveled at how quickly this child had absorbed my teaching philosophies and made them her own. In many ways, she was giving me a second chance at the maternal relationship I'd lost with Brian, though I was careful to remember that I wasn't her mother, just a trusted adult in her life. While Sophia measured flour for the pasta dough, chattering about her day at the international school she attended, my phone chimed with a message. It was from the rehabilitation facility in Switzerland, a weekly update on Brian's progress. The reports had been cautiously optimistic. After initial resistance, Brian had begun engaging more sincerely with the program. His therapist noted emerging signs of genuine remorse, particularly regarding his treatment of me. He wasn't ready for direct contact yet, but had written me a letter that would be forwarded once his counselors had reviewed it. "Is that about my brother?" Sophia asked, noticing my expression as I read the message. I'd been honest with her about Brian, in age-appropriate terms. She knew he had made very bad choices and was now learning to make better ones. Her innocent acceptance of our complicated family situation often provided perspective when adult emotions threatened to overwhelm. "Yes," I replied. "He's doing better." "Good," she said simply. "When he's all better, can he come for pasta too?" "Maybe someday," I answered, tucking my phone away. "That's a long way off." "Though, that's okay," Sophia said with the infinite patience children sometimes display about time. "We can wait." After dinner, a messy but successful attempt at homemade fettuccine with a simple tomato sauce, Maxwell arrived to collect his daughter instead of sending Mrs. Augustine as expected. "I was in the neighborhood," he explained, accepting the coffee I offered. "How is she doing with the pasta making?" "Better than I did on my first attempt," I admitted. "She has natural talent." Like her brother, Maxwell observed quietly, watching Sophia as she packed up her school books. The acknowledgement of Brian as his son still carried weight, even after weeks of adjustment. "Have you read the latest report?" I asked. Maxwell nodded. "It's encouraging. The therapist believes his remorse is becoming genuine, not just calculated to reduce his consequences." "I want to believe that," I said. "But after everything, trust will take time," Maxwell acknowledged. For all of us, we shared a moment of understanding before Sophia bounded over, backpack in place. Daddy, can we take Rachel to feed the birds at the park on Sunday? The one where we met? The park bench where Sophia had found me crying had become a special place for us. We visited occasionally to feed the birds and remember the extraordinary chain of events that had brought us together. If Rachel is free, Maxwell replied, glancing at me questioningly. I'm free, I confirmed with a smile. I'd like that. After they left, I returned to my terrace, gazing out at the Roman skyline now illuminated by twinkling lights. The path that had brought me here was unimaginable just a month ago, a journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and unexpected connection. I thought about the park bench where it had all begun. How in my darkest moment, when I'd been abandoned and alone, a child's simple question had altered the course of my life. How my search for a lost girl's home had led me to confront my own past and reshape my future. The road ahead remained uncertain. Brian's rehabilitation would be a long process with no guaranteed outcome. My relationships with Maxwell and Catherine would continue to evolve in ways I couldn't predict. My new life in Rome was still taking shape, filled with both challenges and opportunities. Yet for the first time in years, perhaps since I'd first held my infant son in my arms, I felt a profound sense of possibility. Not because I was connected to wealth or privilege, but because I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and survived. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, and connections I never expected to form. As the lights of Rome twinkled before me, I realized that sometimes being lost is merely the first step to being found. Sometimes abandonment is simply the painful prelude to a new beginning. And sometimes the mansion at the end of the journey isn't a physical place at all, but the expansive territory of a heart that has learned to forgive, to hope, and to begin again. Thank you so much for spending time with me today and hearing my story. Has anything similar ever happened in your life, where something that seemed terrible at first led to an unexpected blessing? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you enjoyed this journey with me, please like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that even our darkest moments can lead to new beginnings. Until next time, this is Rachel Wilson, signing off from my terrace in Rome.